Yes, my name is Earl Jackne Drudge. My wife's name is Dolores Lossley. Dolores Lossley Drudge. I met her at the KWHS High School Annex when she was just turned 13. We've been together for 58 years. We actually been together for over 60 years, but we've been married 58 years. High school sweethearts, and that's the way it's been. Birthday is March 26, 1932.
Okay. And what street or neighborhood were you born?
I was born on 719 Francis Street, right across from the cemetery. 719 Francis. That's my grandfather's house.
And so you live close to Ann Gardner?
Ann Gardner, the Skippy Doodle, as we call her. Yeah, she lived right on the corner of Angela and Francis. She was my teacher, and she was one of my favorite teachers. We called her affectionately Skippy Doodle.
Mm-hmm. And who are some of your friends who grew up there?
Oh wow, it's a long list. I have a tremendous amount of friends. Of course, all the Conchs I went to school with, and Anita Asperti and Rose Sawyer and friends like Kermit Kerr and oh golly. It's just too many to list. I can't recall all their names that quick, I could write them on a piece of paper for you.
What were some of the games you would play? Some of the games that you would play?
And games? Yeah, well, that's when kids played outside. We played the typical games. The most popular was probably Klee. Of course, you played the hide and go, hide and seek, and we played the hockey with the tin cannon sticks on the streets. Of course, the smaller kids and the girls, they like hopscotch and all this. See, Key West had seasons for most everything. We had kite seasons. All the kids was either flying or building kites. And we had kite fights, which most places had never heard of that I talked to. We used to put the razor blades on the tail so that we'd make the kite dive across and cut the other guy's string. That was a famous pastime. Tops, spinning tops, and of course marbles, shooting marbles was a big sport here. But everything was sort of done on 2 or 3 or 4 week periods of time. Sort of like 4th of July comes along, you celebrate it. Well, that's how we did most of our activities.
What did you do for 4th of July? How did you celebrate 4th of July?
Basically, just back then, all we had was firecrackers and the sparklers, and of course, the bigger guys, we'd get the big 2-inch firecrackers and put them in cans and explode them. A couple of guys got their head cut real bad because of that, and not too much of 4th of July, other than the typical stuff.
Did you spend the night on the beach and get a spot on the beach, or some people said they spend the night?
I practically raised my family down on Beau Grand, Woman Key, Bay Keys, Ballast Key, Man Key, Woman Key. That's where, if it wasn't blowing more than 12 knots, that's where we spent most of our weekends. Diving crawfish, fishing. Of course, crawfish was so plentiful, we used crawfish for bait. And you could catch all the fish you wanted down there in the Beau Grand Channel anytime you wanted to. We used to do a lot of shark fishing off of Beau Grand Beach. Well, a lot of friends, when they'd come down to visit and all, they always dreamed of catching a big shark. Well, you could go to Beau Grand Beach almost any early morning or late evening when the tide was coming in, because they come in to feed on the banks. And we could catch 8, 9, 10, 12-foot sharks off of the beach here. And we used to do it just for sport. We'd just hook them and catch them and pull them in and release them and let them go generally. But that's people that's never seen a big shark or felt the pull of a giant shark, they get a kick. And a German come down here, a German friend of ours, a little man, and he wanted to it, and I took him down there, and I cautioned him. We always tied it around a post that was in the ground. Used to be a shack there. And I said, the shark will take the line from you. And he said, no, no shark big enough. Well, the next thing he knew, he was out in the water. The shark just dragged him right out into the channel there. But that was just a sport thing, just to feel the pull of a big shark like that.
And you said you raised your family in Woman Key and Boat Grand. You mean you would go in the boat and you guys would fish or swim there? Tell me about a day you would spend with your family there.
Well, we'd go down there. Usually we'd leave dark around 6 in the morning. It takes us about 30 or 40 minutes. It's about 12 miles, something like that down there. We used to carry a tent. We'd stay on the beach, sometimes for 2 or 3 days. We'd always dive us some crawfish to eat, and we always use some of them for bait. Because see, a fish will bite at crawfish bait when it's not even hungry. If you use squid or mullet or something like this, they'll bite if they're hungry. But when you put a piece of crawfish on there, and they'll bite anytime. So, and we'd go in the channel, that channel is about 5 miles wide. But you can almost drop a line anywhere in that channel and catch as many fish as you wanted back then. And of course, we'd go around Bow Grand and come back around to Woman Key, and there's a beautiful strip of sand, the prettiest anywhere on the Keys, about a mile long of white sand. And the kids loved to swim there. We used to water ski back and forth. And we spent many times on Woman Key because that beach was real long and it had little trees there for shade. But the white water is still there. It's still the most beautiful spot.
The white sand?
Anywhere. White sand. It's probably it's probably about 100 or 200 yards wide, and it's probably a mile long. And it's beautiful. That was one of our favorite spots to swim because you could see the white water was so clear. If a shark or a big ray or something was coming by, you could see them a long way off against the background of the white sand, you know.
Yeah.
But that's beautiful.
What year were you born again?
1932.
Do you remember anything about the Great Depression in Key West?
What's that?
The Great Depression in Key West. What did your father do?
Yes, I know quite a bit. Of course, I was born in the Depression, but I know a little bit firsthand. I was 3 years old, basically, and I remember quite a bit, even at 3, but my mom and dad went through it. Back in those days, like 719 Francis Street, Conch families stayed together. They pulled together when things was tough, many of them. And we had like 8 groups of family, and when things got tough, we all moved in with Grandpa at 719 Francis. My 3 uncles and their families, and my aunts and their family, and my mom and dad, and we'd all move in there. And all the men, all the uncles and my dad and all would go out looking for work, any work they could get for the day to try to get something to eat. Well, my dad was the most skilled, and he usually got the work. And whatever they made, they would bring home the money, give it to my grandpa and grandma, and they would go buy food, and then we'd all share it, whatever it was. But there was times when the only thing I had to eat as an infant was my mother's breast milk. And it was tough there for a long time. But like I said, families did pull together.
Yeah.
And the men would go out and work, or of course back then most women didn't work, you know. they did some, but it wasn't a commonplace. But they'd come home and just give it to my grandpa, and whatever we had, that's what we shared. And of course, we lived on Tavernier right in 1935 when the major big hurricane come through. Well, we was living there. My dad worked laying track on Henry Flagler's Railroad. And I was only 3 years old, but I can remember quite a bit about, they was building a house and we was living just on a screen porch with screen on it. And my dad come home and said, told my mother, said, get in the car, put everything you can fit in the car and the kids, my sister and I at the time, and we're leaving. That hurricane's gonna hit here in about 2 days and we're not gonna be here. And he says, and I'm never coming back. So he said we go back to Key West or we go to Miami, but we're never coming back here. So my mom said, well, all my family's in Key West, 719 Francis Street. And so we come back here, and that's where we stay. And the hurricane hit about 2 days later and killed almost everybody my mother knew up there.
That's incredible that your father, did that.
He had enough foresight, otherwise we wouldn't have been alive. That was an awful hurricane.
Yeah. And so how did you get? What is your next memory after that? After living in Francis Street, playing as a kid, was that when you got into music, or?
Well, as a young boy, we moved to, my mom and dad bought a little house at 1301 Newton Street. They paid $4,500 for it. And I lived most of my young life up until my later teens right there, 1301 Newton and Georgia Street. And had a wonderful life there, going to school. And of course, swimming was always a big thing. We used to have a swimming hole there in the Garrison Bight. That's when the Garrison Bight was clean. And it was called the grade, and all the kids, if it was school days, as soon as we'd leave from school, everybody would go home, put their books out, throw in their swimsuits, and meet at the grade. And sometimes at 6 in the morning, we would meet there at the grade and swim, and then come home, throw on our school clothes, and go. That's how much we love swimming, And
yeah.
that was really a popular thing. And between that and the Bayview Park, I lived at Bayview Park if I wasn't swimming, because I played ball. I love playing ball. And kids, like I said, we was active. Almost everything we played, jump rope, and all this stuff, and clee. It was always running things and exercise. Where I see a lot of the kids today, a lot of obesity has happened in children today. And they sit there with these little iPods pushing buttons instead of out running and playing.
Right.
But it was a wonderful childhood, believe me.
Yeah.
And of course, what makes it when you got the right parents. See, there's a few kids that parents was kind of strict, and they didn't have quite as much fun as me. But my parents was very lenient, and they gave me a lot of freedom because they could trust me.
Right. What do you remember about the 40s, the war years?
40s? The best part about the 40s was the cars, because I'm into old cars, and I'm still into old cars. I build them and drive them, and I love the old 40s cars. Really, when I was living on Newton Street, when we was kids, every Thursday afternoon after school, they had the matinee, the Western matinees at the Palace Theater.
Yeah.
And all the kids, sometimes we would all ride bikes, sometimes we would all skate. And the owner or manager of the Palace Theater had a special place for us to hang our skates. And we'd all skate from that end of town out through the Graveyard Alley and Carson Lane and go there and put up our skates and see the Western movie. And of course, back then they used to show the movie. They'd show probably 2 cartoons, the old cartoons, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And then they'd give you a 30-minute serial, a Batman or Superman or Dr. Fu Manchu. You saw, and then they showed you the world news. Well, see, that's the only world news that we got. And this was during the World War. And we wanted to see what was happening over there. And they'd always show that first on the screen of the boys fighting. And of course, at that time, only old timers remember this, but everybody was patriotic back then. The government needed aluminum. And every kid around would go around all day picking up gum foil wrappers, we call tin foil. Anything that had that on it. And we would take and make a little ball, and we find something we just keep. And pretty soon, kids would be walking around with a great big ball of silver tin foil. And the bigger that ball is, it was like a badge of honor. I mean, you was proud because you did it, and then the government would pick it up. And of course, the newspapers, you'd pack them out on the sidewalk, and they'd come by and pick that up. You couldn't buy tires. Right out here on the boulevard in Bertha Street, they set up the big machine guns on these big trays made out of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the planes would fly by with a target, and the machine gunners would shoot the 50 calibers at it. And us kids would hang around hoping that they'd give us one of those big 50 caliber brass shells. And they would give us a little bit, but they couldn't give many because brass was scarce.
Yeah.
But we sat out there many times as a kid watching them shoot at the target planes. And then instead of baseball cards like kids collect now, we collected aircraft identification cards. They used to hand out cards so that everybody could identify an enemy aircraft or a friendly. And instead of baseball cards, you had pictures of every American aircraft, fighters, bombers, dive bombers, the Japanese Zeras, the German Stukas. I could identify any plane coming by, and that's what we had instead of baseball cards.
Oh my God.
And it's very, very patriotic. And when you got on a train to go someplace like we did to Detroit one time there, you stood, you didn't sit. When a serviceman come on the train, you got up and gave him a seat. And I had to stand from Miami to Detroit, Michigan. And now some of the servicemen, if it was a woman or children or something, they wouldn't take the seats, but everybody would give them the seats.
Wow.
And it was very, very patriotic.
Wow.
And like I said, even the kids collecting things. Whenever they said they needed something, everybody joined in. And then, of course, when the German subs would sink a ship right out here on these beaches, Rest Beach, the fire bell in the cemetery would ring. And the word would spread like wildfire. A ship was sunk. Everybody would run out there and the stuff would come floating up on the beaches. And sometimes luckily, we never saw a body, but life preservers and the big boxes of stuff they was hauling, and everybody's out there scavenging whatever floated on the beaches. But you had to wade sometimes through 2 or 3 inches of solid black diesel oil. The beaches was just coated with it. And my mom used to fuss me because I'd come home with oil up to my ankles. And it was hard to get off. And of course it killed a lot of birds. The poor seagulls, we'd go grab them and try to wash the oil off. Some of them we saved, some of them we couldn't. 1948 was, I believe, the coldest spell. I dropped down to about 56 degrees, and all the fish close to the seashore froze. And I remember the Garrison Bight was just loaded with frozen fish.
Oh my God.
And some of them you could just poke them and they'd regain consciousness like and go, but it created an awful odor out there for a long time. But when the fish couldn't take that cold, and I don't remember, it was probably in the low 50s, was about the coldest I ever seen it here. Maybe 48, something like that. But it was great years. The Navy, of course, KWHS was loaded with Navy personnel. In fact, I started playing at age 13, and I played for all the Navy clubs for years. And
What was your instrument?
trumpet. I played trumpet. In fact, I entertained the crowd here this week 2 or 3 times. They always want me to bring my horn, you know. And my brother's a fine piano player. And they used to, he and I played for their teenage dances. We played for them when they grew up later in life. And that's why they remember us through the music. My mother taught music for 60 years here, little children, for 60 years.
And your brother's name?
Nolan. My brother's name is Nolan Drudge. He lives in Ocala with me. He still plays professionally jobs. I just play for my own entertainment, making CDs, and I give it to all the conchs if they want it, you know, and I'm strictly into it for fun now. I never did it for a living. I mean, I was a deputy sheriff here, and I was a deputy sheriff for many years until I injured my back and kept going back and re-injuring it in a year in bed, and that was a long story, but I loved it. But when I couldn't do that anymore, but I lived out there on that reef. I dove that reef with scuba tanks from from Lou Key, which is just beside of Big Pine, down there below Marquesas. I love the reef because it's one of the most beautiful sights on earth. And that's what I was telling the kids, well, my conchs now. I said, how can you live in Key West and not want to see the reef? I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places to see. But a lot of conchs never saw it. They never had any interest, and that always kind of puzzled me.
Is there just one reef? I went to one recently. It was by Sand Key, maybe.
Well, that is the reef. The basic, what they call the 12-mile reef, is out there about 4 or 5 miles, and it runs the whole length down to Sand Key, and then it sort of takes a bend kind of northwest, I guess you call it. And of course, there's big patches of rock and reef separate from that, but the main reef sort of runs in a long straight line there. And it's so beautiful to put on a scuba tank. I used to put on an extra 7 pounds or so that I could actually go down and sit on the bottom with my legs crossed and just sit there and watch a million colorful fish in and out. And the palms and the fans and all just sway so soft, and you could hear the little fish talking to each other like. And I love that serenity. It's absolute perfect serenity there. And then a wall of fish, actually a cloud. It would look like a cloud underwater coming towards you, and it would be thousands and thousands of fish, like blue runners or small fish, basically. Sometimes amberjack, but blue runners and stuff like that, or even shads. And they would come at you by the millions, and they would just engulf you, but they'd just go all around you. And there'd be so many of them, you couldn't see further than this.
And when did you do that? Because when did they have scuba tank? It wasn't until later, right?
I started doing that as a young teenager.
Really?
Yeah, I was doing that when I was 13, 14, and I did it up until I left here. I was in my, 50 years later. I love spearfishing. We used to go after the Jewfish. That was the big one. Of course, today they put you in jail if you mention Jewfish, but back then they was plentiful, and it was like big game hunting. I never could afford to go to Africa to shoot a tiger, and of course I wouldn't do that because the tiger doesn't have a chance, against a high-powered rifle. But underwater, I'm in that fish's realm, and I've got a double rubber arbalete, and he can stay underwater as long as he wants. And when you shoot a fish weighing 200 or 300 pounds, he's gonna give you a pretty good ride underwater. And
do they come after you?
No. A Jewfish can't hurt you. They're huge fish. They're way bigger than this table here, but they only have sandpaper teeth. Now they could drown you if you got the line hooked around somewhere, and they could pull you and deep and actually hold you under. So you have to have a sharp knife in case that ever happens, so you can cut your line, so you can. But as far as them attacking, now there is occasion where they'll kind of run wild when you hit them, and they could run into you and maybe injure you, but that's never happened.
What about a bull shark? Have you ever
what's
seen
that?
A bull shark?
I've seen a few bull sharks. Most of the sharks you see here is going to be hammerheads, nurse sharks, and sand sharks. Once in a while you'll see a black tip or a lemon or bull shark, but almost all the time it's going to be those three sharks. The nurse shark and the sand shark, you didn't really have to worry much about. The hammerhead, I sort of was, if they was big. But in all those years of diving, I've been concerned about twice with a big shark. Usually, they'll come by to see what you're doing, because all fish are curious, and all you got to do is do like that, and whoo, they're gone, and you don't see them, unless you have a bleeding fish. So when you shoot a fish and he's bleeding, you need to get him out of the water in the boat, and you always keep him at the end of the line. You don't pull him in close to you. And I've been shot a big grouper and be pulling back to the boat, and I've had a shark or even porpoise, or what they call dolphin today. They'll come by and just swallow him. And but I've lived here, most of my life, and I never heard of anyone getting bit. Barracudas I'm leery of, but I did have one episode with my friend. One of them appeared to be attacking him, and I shot him through the head, and I killed him instantly. But other than that, generally you can just wave your hand.
So when you shot him, you had to be careful not to shoot your friend's hand?
Oh, yeah, you got to make sure. I mean, I wouldn't go spearfishing with just anybody. I had a friend here, my friend Neil Chancellor, that was a deputy on the sheriff's. He was a sergeant. He taught me most everything I knew about police work. And he was an excellent diver, and he was very dependable. And he and his son, Roy, we would dive together, the three of us. And we usually like to dive in threes. And that way, if one of us shot a big group or jewfish, the other two kept their guns loaded. Once in a while, the other one would have to shoot to get 2 lines on the jewfish or grouper. But one of us always kept the gun loaded. And one of us always usually carried a 440 Magnum bang stick. And that's just aluminum telescopic thing, and it had a 440 Magnum head on it with a shell in it. And if a shark or something like that come by, we could just tap him and it would kill him instantly. It would blow his head off. It was very, very powerful. But we never used that. Some guys hunted them that way, but see, that's not fair. If I'm gonna hunt an animal, you know, and I wouldn't hunt anything on land, but those jewfish were good eating. And of course, back in the 40s, that fed a lot of people. And when we'd bring home a 150, 200, 350 pound jewfish, it would feed our family and a whole bunch of other families. And it was wonderful. We used
you had to fillet it?
It was all fillet.
Yeah.
And when you catch a jewfish, you have to bleed him pretty quick. Otherwise, the blood goes through the meat and ruins it. As soon as you catch him, you go down at the tail and you make a slice a certain place, and you let the blood flow out. And you always bleed him. And right there on Bay Hundy Bridge, I guess you're familiar with the tall bridge, the old Bay Hundy Bridge. Well, my dad was a foreman building that back in the 40s, I guess it was. And him and I was a child, 10 years old, 11, we'd go on Bay Hundy Bridge, which a lot of people didn't know this, and you could catch all the jewfish you wanted off of Bay Hundy Bridge. The only problem of it is you got about an 80-foot drop of line, and you couldn't pick them up. And you'd have to walk them the whole length of half of the length of the bridge to get them on the beach. And we used to go up there on a Sunday in our old 41 Lincoln Zephyr. And I'd run ahead and I could look down at the pier, and they'll only appear during slack tide. They lazy fish, they won't swim against the tide. So we'd just sit on the beach until slack tide, when the tide quit moving. Then I'd run up ahead and I'd spot them. And I'd tell my dad, here's one here, and he'd come and he'd drop. We'd take a big shark hook about this long with 1/4-inch rope, and would hook a live lobster, a big live lobster, by his tail so he could flop. And we'd just drop it right down, and as soon as it dropped in front of him, he'd just suck it in. And then he'd head down, and when he'd head down, we'd strike him. And he'd only pull for a few minutes because they're lazy. But then we had that job of walking them the whole length. You know how you got the bridge things? Yeah. And when we get down there, my dad would throw the line over when I run around the beach and slide them up on the beach. And then he'd bleed them. And then he'd have big knives and he'd fillet. And the fillets would be almost the size of this table. Up by his gills would be 5 or 6 inches thick and taper down, you know. But it would feed a lot of people. We caught, one day there, we caught 3. We caught over 900 pounds of fish with 3 fish. We put them between the bumper. The old 40 cars had the hood and then the fenders. And we'd lay them between the fenders and the hood to bring them home. So we'd feed a lot of people with that.
Wow, that's awesome.
And during the 40s, my dad and I, we fed a lot of people there. He and I used to go out sailing. We couldn't afford a motorboat. We used to sail out the cow days. And if you know anything about sailing in the cow days, you have to be a sailor to do that. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very crooked channel. And you have to tack almost every 10 or 15 seconds if the wind's blowing wrong. And we'd go out fishing, and the fishing was so good that in 2 or 3 hours, the boat would be on the verge of sinking. We'd have to quit fishing. And we'd come in and load his pickup truck full of fish. We'd take a few of the special ones we want, the groupers and stuff like that, and then we'd ride down to the corner of Whitehead and Angela. and the black people would be waiting there. They were so used to that blue pickup truck, and me and my dad, they'd be waiting there, and they'd be over that truck. I mean, like vultures. Of course, that was, at that time, some of those, that was the best meal they had all day, or all week.
Yeah.
And we would just, and every Sunday, we'd bring in a load there for a long time. And even 50, 60 years later, when I'd walk down through that town, and some of them old timers was, "You Mr. Sam Drudge's boy, ain't you?" I said, "Yes, sir." And they'd recall us bringing those fish to them. And of course, some of them worked for my dad for many years. He was the oldest living contractor on the island. He built over 700 structures on this island. As my brother asked me several years ago, we was here talking, and he said, "Brother," he says, "if you could go back to any one particular day in your life, what would it be?" And I didn't even have to think. It was the day my dad bought me my 1946 Cushman motor scooter. You see, because up until then, Key West was kind of small. From North Drive on out, that was basically boonies. We used to go out there hunting with our Red Ryder BB guns. And to take a bike and ride way out to the other end of the island, I mean, you didn't do that every day. You only saw, you know, the interior island. But the minute you get a motor scooter, it opens up the whole island to you. And you can ride around the boulevard 100 times, you know, and gas was only like 18 cents to 24 cents a gallon. You could ride all week on a gallon of gas on one of them, and a bunch of the kids got the motor scooters. And it just opened up the world to us, because we could ride and go any place, anytime we wanted to. Before, you had to get on a bike, and it was a long ride to go someplace. And I have to say, that was, because I didn't expect my dad to be able to buy me one, because he couldn't afford it. And when he stopped there that day and took me in, it was a total shock. But but it's just like everything else, just like when they gave me, my mom and dad bought their first and only new car, 48 Buick at Mulberg Chevrolet. I drove it off of the showroom floor for him. 2 weeks later, they let me take it to school. And I only lived from here to those cars from school. I mean, I'm talking about 200 or 300 yards from school. But I wanted to go show the kids my dad's new car. Rode around after school, come home, thanked them, gave them the keys. They handed the keys back. They said, "It's yours." Wow. And for a parent to give their child their first and only new car, that's rare. And that was my second biggest day, as far as excitement goes for that. Of course, that opened up a whole new ball game. And of course, back then, girls didn't drive. And if a boy had a neat car, I'm talking about a $200 clunker. I was lucky. I had a brand new car. I mean, you was in like Flynn. I mean, the girls really wanted to be seen riding around in a car. So that helped you socialize some too. And of course, most of it was parked out here on the South Roosevelt Boulevard, right off of Bertha, what we call the Bridle Path, or the Pines as we called it. That was Lover's Lane. After going to Jimmy's Drive-In or PZO's Drive-In, that was the two drive-ins. Everybody would head out there and park with their girlfriends and watch the moon come up and go down and what have you. But everything was different then, because making out with a girl then was holding her hand, your arm around her, stealing a kiss here or there. It wasn't like today. You know, these kids go a lot further than that. But that's what we called making out.
Yeah.
And of course, guys wouldn't.
Those little kids are driving me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But guys wouldn't cuss in front of a girl. If the guys were standing around telling a little dirty joke or cussing or something, as soon as a girl approached, the first guy that saw it, "Hey, it's a girl coming." And that's the way it was. Today, you can go on some of these little elementary school and you hear words that I never even said in my life.
I know.
It's a different world, you know.
It is.
But it was a wonderful teenage period of this country to grow up in. simply because it was so simple. And it wasn't all about stuff, material things. You lived meager because you had to. You lived in a little $4,500 house, most of us, except maybe a doctor's son or daughter. They lived better, but we didn't care. I mean, my house, to me, was a mansion. But the difference is my mother was there. No matter what time of the day that I would come home, she was there. Today, somebody else, no one's there. There's a lot of empty homes. Kids come home from school and their father's out working, their mother's out working, and they didn't have that. It might not have been important to them, but it sure was important to me. If I come in and I wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I could make it myself, but it tasted better if my mama made it. You know, it's just one of those things. If I skinned my knee, she fixed it, you know. I didn't come home to an empty home, never. And that was the great part of growing up. And if a girl was a little promiscuous, or however you say it, they was called loose. We called them, that girl's loose. But there might have only been 2 of them in the whole high school. You know what I mean? It wasn't many. And they built that reputation, but the average girl, their morals was way up here. And they demanded respect. And most of the boys would show them respect. And that was a big difference. And I see that because I've raised 2 daughters and a son, and of course I raised mine under the same morals. They graduated here. My son didn't, but my 2 daughters graduated here. And they was raised under the same kind of thing. But after that, everything changed, went downhill. Yeah. But Key West is a wonderful place to grow up in. I'm sorry to see it change. I come here, I get homesick once or twice a year. About every 8 months, I have to come home. But after I'm here for about a week, I start getting a little depressed. I get on my bicycle, my camera, and I ride down all these little streets, sometimes, usually for about 7 hours. Sometimes taking pictures, sometimes I've already taken every picture I can. And I realize that the houses are still there. Newton Street, which was known as Hell Street then, it looks almost the same. It has in the houses and the trees and the cracks in the sidewalk. Everything is the same, but there's no one there that I know. Children are not out playing. There's not a man and a woman and children in the houses. And when I realized that, I said, it's almost like a ghost town to me, because I look down Newton Street and you don't see anyone. No kids that's out skating or flying kites or spinning tops or hopscotch or clee or Red Rider or Rover come over and all this stuff. There's no activity. And that's when I start getting a little depressed. And then I see they preserve some things, like this Rest Beach out here. Rest Beach was the only natural, beautiful beach we had. And my dad told him, because he was a pretty wise man, and we used to spend, my mom and dad would take us there picnicking. It had a beautiful sand. And out in the water, you know where the White Street Pier is? Well, there was 3 sand balls from Rest Beach was perfect, all pure sand. And then there was 3 big sand balls going out there. And you could walk out close to there, not quite as far as the end of the White Street Pier, and there's nothing but beautiful white sand. We used to build castles in low tide, and then when the high tide come in, sit there and wash them, wash away. And they had the little thatch huts along the Rest Beach and all. Well, my dad told them, the authorities says, if you don't put up a breakwater to stop the sand, it's all going to wash around this point right here. And that's exactly what it did. All that beautiful sand and that beautiful beach. Because Smathers Beach, that was nothing. Up there on the boulevard and Higgs Beach, Rest Beach was the natural beach. It looked like a woman key. The beautiful white strips I'm telling you about.
Well, if he didn't build, what do they need to build for?
What is that?
What do they need to build to stop the sand?
They needed to build a jetty out, just a jetty out from 100 feet or so that when the tides come in, they all sweep around the island here, and it would stop the sand. But it kept washing the sand, and it washed it all down here, and all the sand on that beach right now. You can go out here at the other end of the main ship channel, what they call, there's a house on stilts, what used to be called Hemingway's. I don't know why they called it his house. And right around that, all that sand is deposited out there. You can see great big mounds of beautiful white sand out there. And all they would have had to done was build out a little 100-foot jetty to stop the sand from washing. And that was the only pretty natural beach in Key West.
And what about South Beach?
South Beach was always a nice little natural beach, but that was small compared to Rest Beach. Rest Beach went from the White Street Pier to Bertha Street. And there's a little Cuban shack there. The fellow used to sell snacks and stuff, and he rented little boats there. And
what happened with South Beach? The sand flow stopped too?
Sand beach, sure, they don't have good sand there. They have sand on the beach. But when you walk out into the water, it isn't that pure white sand. It has seaweed and rocks and stuff like this. I'm sure that sand went the same way because they didn't have a jetty out there either. And all that sand is over at that end, the north end of the main ship channel. And it was so beautiful. And my dad told him, says, it'll be gone. And in about 15, 20 years, it was gone. And Rest Beach was nothing but a seaweed clump. Now they've improved it. I love what they did there. They cleaned the beach area away and made the little stuff. But there's nothing but seaweed and stuff out there. Now they built the White Street Pier, and that's going to start trapping it maybe, and some of that sand might appear again, and it might develop maybe 50 years from now, but it'd be too late for me. But that was a beautiful natural beach. And then of course the powers to be used to let certain people steal the sand from the beach, and you could go out there almost any midnight and they would be loading their dump trucks, selling it to the construction companies. And they let them haul away tons and tons and tons of that beach just to make money off of it. And they knew it was going on because some of their very authorities was out there. I sit out there with my girlfriend, parked and watched them many times. And it was a laugh and joke. I mean, if you mention this to most any comp, they might even tell you who it was. I'm not going to call any names, but it was a running joke that the authorities was actually stealing the sand off the beaches. And, things like that it shouldn't have been allowed. And of course, the big thing is, of course, my love is coconut trees. If I would have been in power here and had anything to say, this island would be saturated with coconut trees. The bite that come by killed a lot of them, and then they brought in these from the Bahamas, I think, someplace, and they're beautiful. But on the boulevard, that should be the only boulevard on the East Coast that you could ride down, a beautiful boulevard circled with beautiful, big, healthy coconut trees. And when the drunks would knock them down, they wouldn't make them replace it. You can see them missing all along there. I worked them. I worked the accidents. I'd go there and some drunk knocked down 2 of them, and they'd fine them $100, but they wouldn't make them replace the coconut tree. That boulevard should be beautiful. And of course, they never cared for them, so they're actually stumped. Those coconut trees has been that size since I was a little boy, because the mall they planted them in is like concrete, and the city don't go to water them, and they need to chop up the soil. If I lived here young again, I would do that myself. I would take a coconut tree, and at least one a week, I would go there with a rototiller and loosen that soil and put some fertilizer and water it. If it took me 10 years, I'd go do that to those coconut trees. But that's what they should do. Every coconut tree that goes down, they ought to plant 2 in its place. Of course, it's a pot of the island, and I just saw where the cemetery where I have all my family buried, right across from 719 Francis.
Yeah.
I played like many times as a kid there. Always respectful for the graves. You never step on a grave site. And we used to fly our kites in the cemetery. And but I see where they just cut down all the big palms. In fact, they cut down 4 of them right next to my family's grave site, which was fine because they was disrupting the grave things. But what do they plant? They plant sable palms because it's the state tree. Well, a sable palm is basically useless. It grows nothing but tall and has a low thing up at the top. It doesn't give you any shade. Susceptible to high winds. It's nice, and it's nice if you're putting it alongside of a tall building. But why not plant a coconut tree? It gives you shade, gives you coconuts. It's not messy. You don't have to rake leaves. Every once in a while, a worker could go by with a little pickup truck and pick up the palms. Things like that, you know, that I look at from the beauty of it.
Right.
Then on the other hand, they've taken a lot of these beautiful old Conch homes and they've made them gorgeous. Because see, the Conch people didn't do that. The Conch people was pretty satisfied with the way things were. They would only paint the front of the house. They never painted the sides or the back. And of course, when these people come down here and offer such huge sums of money for a little Conch house that we paid $5,000 for, it was hard to turn down. And of course, they renovate them, and some of them they've done beautiful jobs on. But they totally, the price is just, the houses, because I built homes. I always built, my wife and I built 7 homes for ourselves. And my dad was the oldest builder here. We built 2 out on Key Haven. My last 2 homes I built none. Home I built for $16,500. It sold for $560,000. And then the next year it sold for $660,000. This is insane. You know, you could build a beautiful house back then for $15,000, $20,000 on a $2,000 or $3,000 lot. Now they got lots out there, it's $1 million. And the very house that I built and lived in at Azalea Drive, $660,000. I mean, that is unreal. And of course, that prevented me from ever being able to live back here again. I could never afford it. But the money that I could get from that house, I live like a king in Ocala. My property is as big as a city block here, and it's beautiful. And I built a beautiful home. That home and property, if it was sitting here in Key West, would be at least $3 million. And it only cost me just a fraction of that, you know.
Right.
It's not in Key West, but a lot of people left because of the economy. There's always been a little bit there between Conchs that stayed and Conchs that left, the exile Conchs. But some of them mentioned about greed and all this, but there was no greed. First place, I sold my house when I didn't get that kind of money for it. I only got a very nominal fee, because I left 2 years before the big boom.
When was the big boom?
It must have been about, I left in 77, and I'm going to say about 2 years later, things started to blow crazy here. And like I said, I got a nominal fee for my house. It was easily worth it. But that's when that happened. But people left because several reasons. First, their kids had to leave because there was nothing for them much here. So when their kids left and got married, and these old timers realizing, well, I'm 65, 70, I'll move up with my kids. That was one of the big reasons. It wasn't greed. Sure, they got $500,000 for their little $5,000 house, but they could go up there and buy a beautiful home with a swimming pool for $60,000, and then they could live off of the income. Well, that's a big help for somebody that's 70 years old and all they got is a little pension. Sure, people move. There's nothing wrong with that. There isn't anything greedy about that.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's good common sense. It's a sacrifice because you're not living in Key West. You're not living at home. But it wouldn't do any good for me. I ride down there on my bicycle every time I come here, go to my old homestead and look at it. And I said, if I had millions of dollars right now and I could buy my old homestead, which I'd love to have, I'd be there a week and I'd be depressed. Because every time I walk out on my porch, there isn't anybody there. All the Conchs that lived on Newton and Angela and Georgia and William and they're all gone. So it isn't just the island. The island of Key West is still beautiful. The ocean's beautiful, the coconut trees, everything. But when you take the people out of the island, it's like taking the heart out of an island. You still got people here, and there's nothing wrong with them or anything. I'm just saying, but the original Conchs that lived here, they made the island the culture that it is, and that culture will disappear. The modern people, the people here that's into it for strictly making money, they don't care about that. They pretend they do, but
You mean the Conchs or the new people that moved
no,
in?
the new people, and even some of the greedy
Yeah.
Conchs. I mean, you got some of both. Let's face it, and it doesn't matter to them whether there's a guava tree on this island or not. Back in my day, that was important. I mean, if you didn't have a guava tree, your neighbor did. And if you wanted Spanish limes or guavas or sapodillies or tamarinds or whatever, you could go to somebody's yard in your neighborhood and get something you want. And the people destroy them like it was nothing because they don't know. That wasn't part of their culture. And that's sad. If I was in a power like some of these power people here, I'd plant coconut trees. Everybody would, or not everybody, but there'd be thousands of guava trees and sapodilli trees and tamarins and there are still quite a few like sapodilli trees and stuff around, but I wouldn't not let that go away because that's part of the culture. And
It tastes really good.
My grandpa, 719 Francis Street, he had the best Spanish lime tree on the island. And I'm not saying that because he's my grandpa, but I've eaten Spanish limes from a lot of trees. And his just seemed to be a little bit sweeter. Maybe it's in my mind, but I sit on the upstairs porch, come out of the attic, and sit on the porch and eat them until I could hardly talk because it ties your mouth up if you eat enough of them.
Yeah, I did the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the things that made Key West, the uniqueness is what you need. You can take an old conch house and make it worth $10 million. And if it don't have the conch culture there, if it doesn't have the things that made the island its uniqueness, because the conch people is what did it. For instance, I don't want to bore you with any of this stuff, but you can use whatever you want. We started a reunion.
Switch that. Oh, I think they're finally leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. We started a reunion in Ocala. It went on for 20 years. My band played for it when we started that, we had it every 3 months. 4 times a year, we had a reunion there, and we would have 250 to 500 conchs come from all over Florida, and even 2 Greyhound bus loads from Key West just to see their conchs up there. Now, there's no other place in the world that you would find a group of people in a 25,000 population town or city or what that would go to a reunion every 3 months to see each other.
Right. 8 hours away from the hometown, or 7 hours away, or whatever.
Oh yeah, and I'm talking about they come as far from California, Georgia, Virginia.
No, I think it's nowhere else in the world does that.
No, you would never, you'd be lucky to find 500 people that would come from any town to see each other. But every 3 months, only the conchs. And right till today, I mean, we gave it up because most of the old conchs that appreciated what I'm just said, they're dying. There's very few of them left. Most of them in my age, or the ones that's just 2 or 3 years older than me, they're gone. Or they got too sick to travel. And pretty soon it dwindled down until it wasn't enough. And the young people's not going to carry that on because they don't have the memories that we have. My generation was the last that was old enough to remember back then and young enough now. Like my children, they was born here and they're conchs, but they don't have near the in the heart like I do. They you know, they just didn't live it. It was all changing. But it's the people. It's like the little thing on my poem that I wrote up a picture of a conch shell, and I said it was sort of like a conch shell without a conch. It's empty. And Key West without a conch is empty. Now we still have conchs here, and God bless them because they're the ones that gives us a toehold on the island, so to speak. And I'm glad to see the ones that can afford it or the ones that's willing to sacrifice. But for the kind of money that it takes to live here, most people don't have. And the ones that's doing, they're surviving. I talk to them. They can't afford air conditioning. Maybe their bedroom, maybe for a few hours or something. My house up there, I keep it year-round climatized, air conditioned all year or heated all year. I can put in a swimming pool and can afford the water, and I've got a yard from here to this cars over there, you know, and I can grow all my citrus trees, and I don't have to ask anybody what color I can paint my house or whether I can fly an American flag on it, and I don't have to ask anybody anything. I just, you know, I like that freedom. Back in those days here, if you'd have tried telling Noel Conch that he couldn't paint his house green and purple, I mean, he might as well be talking to the wall. But today, you know, with all the rules and regulations, just like with fishing, I would never fish again. I come here and I get to go out on a boat with my brother-in-law, but I wouldn't even take a fishing line with me or my spear gun. I take my diving mask and my fins and my snorkel because they're so strict. They have so many rules. I would have to carry a book to see if I caught a fish the right size or the right weight, and have you got this and that and all this. Well, for 60 years, I've traveled these waters. I've dove every square inch of it, fished it, enjoyed it, and I knew how to take care of it. I never threw an empty can or a piece of trash in the ocean. I caught the fish that I wanted to eat, and the ones I didn't, I either threw back alive or I brought them home to friends that needed a good meal. But I wouldn't enjoy it out there. The last time I went out to get crawfish, I took my cousin that just retired from the CIA. He wanted to catch some crawfish. I took him out there and we found some pretty good crawfish. I let them dive them because my back was bad that day and I wanted them to have the fun. And I sit up there just measuring the crawfish with the official measure. And here comes the Marine Patrol, and they come by and they measure all of them. This one's over, and all of a sudden they get to one. 3/16 of an inch too short. 3/16 of an inch. Says this one's short. I said it can't be. I says I measured these myself. I'm using an official thing that I bought. He took his and he put it up alongside of mine. He says yours is wrong. In the manufacture of it, it was 3/16 of an inch off. And I didn't say anything anymore. I was so angry that I didn't want to talk to him. And I thought to myself, 3/16 of an inch. And he's admitted that the professional thing I bought was wrong. Well, he didn't give me a ticket, but he gave a citation, which is the first time ever in my life. And back in the old days, the Marine Patrol would pull up there and say, "How's it going, Jack? You got any?" "No, I'm not." "Well, look, if you go down here, over there by those rocks over there, you'll find all you want." That was the way the Marine, they was there to help you. Unless you was really messing up, they wouldn't mess with you. And I like that kind of live. See, that was island living. Live and let live a little bit. But there's been good come because of it, and there's been bad. But everything will change, and usually not for the good. Just like Ocala. My friends up there that was born and raised there, they cry the same thing. Ocala, when we first moved there 28 years ago, was a nice little cow town. That's why I chose it. It's still a nice place, and I like Ocala. Beautiful rolling horse farms, beautiful oak trees. You see every dollar, your tax dollar, is on your beautiful parks. You got beautiful streets and sidewalks, and you see your tax money there. And but those young boys, it's older guys now, they pine because they saw their little cow town turn into what it is now. So it happens everywhere, but this happened to be my home. And personally, if I'd have been running the show, if they'd have said, "Jack, we put you in total charge," I'd have put a gate up at Cow Key Bridge. I said, now, I'd have made Stock Island a parking lot. And all the tourists come down, they park there, and I have a tram come in and take them for the day. The only people who drive on this island is Conch and delivery trucks. Come 11 o'clock or whatever have you, everybody, and have the motels out along the waterfront where the tourists can see the water and feel the breeze and have a little beach and all. But they could have left this in a pure state. And I've talked to people and they laugh. They say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. You couldn't do that." Well, they did it. They've done it in other places. Cades Cove is one in the Great Smoky Mountains. Only the original residents can own land there. They're the only ones that can live there. Nobody can do anything but them. They got a loop drive. You drive in there for 25 miles and you make the loop drive. You enjoy the beauty of 200-year-old farms. Gorgeous, just like it was 200 years ago. They did it there. Yeah. But not when it's money. And the very thing that draws the people here, like everywhere else, the mass of people destroy what brought them here. And then that's the sort of the round robin thing that happens most every place. The traffic. I mean, you could ride around the boulevard. We used to picnic out there. You could sit in the middle of the boulevard and you might see 3 cars all day long back in the 40s, 50s. This is a traffic jam in our little tiny narrow streets. And anything goes. Nobody obeys any rules. These bicycles and tricycles or whatever have you, and everybody just cuts in front and goes and blocks traffic when they want. And they can call it what they like, but only the people that don't know any different. You know, it's just like if you've never experienced something, you don't miss it. And that's the thing. And the people that's running the show, they never experienced it when it was like it was. Or if they did, they don't care, because as long as there's money to be made. But that happens everywhere, and there's nothing anyone's going to do about it. That's human nature. But this island was a wonderful place for home. And I come home and I enjoy it. This 11 days I've been here, this is the best I've spent in many a day, because I've gotten with 4 different groups of conchs every day. And I got to go out on the boat one day. I don't do any fishing, like I said. I don't do anything. So when the Marine Patrol comes by, they can search the boat all they want. All I want to do is jump in the water with my mask and snorkel and see a little grunt swimming by a sea fan. And that's all I care, you know, because it's so beautiful. Sand Key was so beautiful. We used to picnic out there. We'd go out there and spend all day. That used to be, I don't know how it is now. I've been out there for quite a few years.
The hurricane
Changed it.
That's what, yeah.
Well, see, that was a nice, small, but it was a nice sand, high sand thing there. We used to camp, we used to sort of picnic under the shade of the big lighthouse. And we'd use that as a sort of a jumping off place. We'd go out and dive forget the names of them now, Eastern Dry Rocks, Western Dry Rocks and all, and then we'd come back there and eat with the kids and the family, you know. But that was always beautiful. Out here a few miles off of the boulevard, there used to be 3 sandbars. They used to call them the sandbars. I don't know if they're still there. They were small islands, probably about the size of this concrete thing here. And beautiful reef. It was right on the reef. But for some reason, sand rose up there. And we used to get on that sometimes when it was real, real rough. And after fishing for hours, I'd get a little feeling, a little queasy, and I'd say, Dad, let's go on the beach for a few minutes. I'd set my foot on the beach and walk around, picking up shells and stuff. I'd feel good in a few minutes and go back out fishing again, you know. But we used to dive and spearfish, and you could get anything you wanted. Fishing was just incredible. And all the if you wanted lobster tonight, we used to walk off of Rest Beach or Smathers Beach or behind the Casa Marina or right out here. Walk out and water about up to here and get all the lobster and conch you wanted. You didn't have to go out in a boat or anything. Because I played my first job at 13 years old, and believe it or not, I played in the White End Bar. That was a little dive right there at the corner of Truman Avenue. It was Division Street then and Watson Street. And it was a little white end bar, and I played my first job there. And then I played to the drum bar, which is the next corner down. And that was the only 2 what we call dives. And I was only 13, and I was just anxious to get my teeth sunk into playing. And then we played for the USO, for the Navy people for years. And of course I played for the Moose Club for years, the Elks Club, the Country Club, the American Legion. I played down there on, you know, the Two Friends, some and all, but mainly I played for the better clubs. And Buddy Chavez was a kid coming up with me, and he was a good drummer then. And I had him and my friend Marvin Bozo and Tony Ramirez. Over the years, I used one or the other. We played together for years. My brother-in-law, which is passed now, Hector Barossa, you probably heard of him. A great sax player, very unique character, and everyone in Key West that knew him. But he could play a sweet saxophone. In fact, I have his saxophone. I've been learning to play it a little bit. And we played many jobs down at the old Garden of Roses, down there on Green Street. We played there for the only time in my life I ever played 7 nights a week. We played there, and my brother piano and Hector, and Jimmy Gamble was the drummer there. He was another local boy that grew up with me. Jerry Hendricks, I just found out today he passed away, piano player. I got wonderful video of him playing, and Jimmy Gamble and Buddy Chavez and Buddy Chavez's brother Armando Chavez and Jim Vaganini on bass, and of course Danny Acosta, which is one of the great bongo and conga players there is, you know. In fact, I'm getting ready. I've got a DVD of a Tampa dance that we went and played in 24 years ago in Tampa for a big shindig up there, and it's got all of them playing in it, and they didn't know I had this, and I'm taking him a copy of it. I gave one to Buddy Chavez. If you ever want to hear it, just ask Buddy, and they was just thrilled when they saw that I had all these old timers. It was the first and last time we ever got together as all the good Cuban players and all together in one time.
And where was that in Tampa?
This was in Tampa. It was, I don't know, it was in some big auditorium, and it must have been for some big wigs. I think the mayor and all that crowd, you know. It was packed. But Emilio Rojas, he lived there, and he was a fine sax player and flute player. So that was the only time we got to play with him, the first and last time. But I got it all on video, and when they found out I did, boy, they said, I got to have a copy, so I run a few copies for them. We grew up playing all the clubs. Then back then, see, it was more work than it was musicians. Of course, we had the Navy, and the Navy had the Officers Club, the Chief Petty Officers Club, and the Enlisted Man's Club, in each one of their things, out at Boca Chica, the main gate, and over in Sixby. Like. And when you went there to play, if they liked your music at all, they didn't want you to leave because they might not get another band. And sometimes I'd play for 5 solid years. I would have to beg them to let me leave because I wasn't playing for the local people, and I didn't want to lose contact with them. Mm-hmm. And reluctantly, you know, but I played solid 5 years. For the Chiefs Club was the most fun. The Chiefs Club, they was real fun-loving, it seemed to me, and we just enjoyed playing every Friday and Saturday night.
And where was it? Where was the Chiefs Club?
This was right inside the Southern Street Gate, the one that we come into. The first building on the right was the Chiefs Club. And I used to go there. Of course, they had strict regulation. You had to have passes, and they had to know you and everything. But, of course, I played there so long, they knew me, and I didn't have any problem. But we played for those Chiefs Clubs, and sometimes enlisted in offices.
Oh, and I wanted to ask you, what generation Conch are you?
I never even thought about that. Let's see, well, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and me. So it's four generations. Mm-hmm. I don't know of anyone before. My great-grandfather, Pa Kemp, he lived there on Ash Street, right around the corner from where we lived on Francis Street. See, my dad was the lighthouse keeper at the entrance of Nassau. My dad's dad. He run the lighthouse at the entrance to Nassau. And my daddy lived on that little Paradise Island with his daddy, with just the two of them. He never went to school a day in his life. And he lived there until he was 14. His mom and sisters and all lived in Nassau proper. But he didn't want to live, he wanted to be with his daddy on the lighthouse. So he never attended school. And at 14, I've got pictures of me standing there at the lighthouse. And at 14, they decided to come to this country because England was turning over the rule to someone else, and my dad couldn't stand that. So they come here, and of course my dad met, my grandparents was already here, my mama's side. And they come from the Bahamas too. Spanish Wells and all those places. Most of the Conchs did. And my dad met my mother there at 719 Francis, and of course he had those 3 kids. But in that period of time, what was amazing was my dad without any 1 day of education. And when he was 19, he was a foreman for Flagler Railroad, laying railroad tracks. And he was a foreman building the Bay Hundred Bridge. Wow. And the Long Key Bridge. He come here, and in hard times when things got bad, he opened up a bake shop. He become a master baker. No education. He was a master historian. He could sit with any American or English professor and talk on their level about American and English history. He could build, he built over 700 buildings here. He could build multi-story buildings. He could build anything you wanted. Had his contractor's license. He was the oldest living one here. And he could build a beautiful boats. Him and I built 3 boats of our own. I didn't have enough sense to ask him, well, how'd you learn all this stuff, Dad, without an education? But he did. And I saw it, but it was too late, you know, just like most kids. We're not interested in what your parents did. We're not interested in what we're doing. And I knew a little bit because I did talk with, I was close with him because I worked with him and learned to build and everything. And of course, in the process, we opened up the Melody Inn. Well, if you talk to any of the old Conch, that'll ring the bell. All the kids remember that in high school. It was, we built the Gulfstream Food Market, which is now Faustus, there on White Street.
Yeah.
My dad and I, we built that as a Gulfstream Food Market for old Mr. Barnaby. And right across the street, we built the building that just burned down.
What was Mr. Barnaby's name? Barnaby, you said?
Barnaby.
Okay.
I found out later that I thought we built it for him, but he's the one that opened up the store. But I found out that it belonged to Judge Lopez. I found out through his daughter when I said it on the email. She set me straight on it. She said that wasn't Mr. Barnaby's building. It was my dad's building, which was Judge Lopez. I thought, you know, we dealt with Mr. Barnaby because he had everything to say about it. But we built that, and then across the street, the Melody Inn, and used to be Chapel's 5 and 10 cent store. Well, that building, they just knocked down the remains of it. That was the Melody Inn in one section, and we rented the 2/3 of it to Mr. Chapel, which was a city commissioner, and he run a 5 and 10 cent store. Really nice guy. And that's what was in there. We had our little ice cream parlor and a little sandwich shop, and all the kids, as soon as they get from school, they'd come to the Melody Inn. And I used to play music. I had the little band. We'd sit there, me and Buddy Chavez and Marvin and all. We'd sit there and play music, and the kids would dance, and I'd make them all this kind of sodas. I was inventing sodas, you know, chocolate strawberry Cokes and stuff like that. They see me making it for myself because I used to experiment, and they said, "What you making?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I take a cherry Coke and I take and swirl some chocolate around the glass a little bit, and pretty soon they all." And you know, I used to throw the ice cream scoops in the air like they used to do in the movies, you know, and catch it for the milkshakes. And then once in a while I tried to get fancy and I'd throw it up and catch it in back of me. And most of the time I did, but once in a while I'd miss. But that was a hangout for the kids. The kids remember the Melody Inn, and it was mine, and I used to play my music there.
And where was it located again?
It was right there at the corner of Virginia and White Street.
Okay.
Faustus is right across the street.
Okay.
The 4th of July restaurant is just 2 doors down.
Okay.
And of course, Wong Mag's was a little grocery store, which everyone knew, and then went down to the high school. But we built that building, and I was sorry to see when they sent me the videos of it burning, and it was really sad. But that was a hangout for the kids, and all these people that say, "You mentioned Melody Inn." Oh yeah. But that was good days. A lot of wonderful memories. I enjoyed my life.
Yeah. I know Key West is the best, no doubt about it.
Oh, it's no question about it. I mean, I don't like some of the things that's changed. When I was in the sheriff's work for many years, and when it started its decline with the hippie generation in 1960s. Mm-hmm. Massive hippies come here because it was warm and they could go around half clothed. Mm-hmm. And of course, wherever the hippies basically went, the drugs followed. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it was. I mean, I ain't blaming the hippies, but the drug culture come right with them. And then that's when you first started having to lock your doors. See, we only had a screen door in our house. We didn't even have a solid door. You leave your bicycle and your skates or anything else out in the yard, and the next morning it's there. Well, pretty soon you walk out in your front porch and you got some hippie sleeping on your front porch. You got to lock your cars or they sleeping in your cars. If you leave a bicycle out there, it's gone. Well, see, this was the first thing. Now we got to lock our cars. Never locked a car before, and lock your house and all. Well, that kind of got a little discouraging. Of course, I was a deputy then. I had to deal with a lot of these, and I saw their dealings. You know, like you and I, if we got injured and we went to the hospital, you'd sit there and you'd show identification and you'd sit and wait your turn. Not them. They'd walk in there, hey, you can't go in there. They'd walk into the operating room or this room, lay on the table and dare somebody to throw them out. They'd tell them, either throw me out or treat me. Well, the hospital couldn't throw them out. They'd call the deputies, and I'd go out there. What can I do? You want me to throw them out? I'll put them out.
Right.
Oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. Then something happened, and they'll sue us. And they'd go into restaurants. And then 3 or 4 of them would eat a big dinner and everything, and then they'd tell the waitress, you might as well call the police. We don't have any money. Well, they'd call the police, and you'd get there. Well, all right, I've got all the names. You're going to sign a warrant. Well, I can't leave my business to go sign no warrants. I lose more money, and these hippies knew that. And the guy would say, no, just let them go. It's not worth the trouble. And they'd go out laughing. And this aggravated me. And then, of course, the drug scene got where some of my local friends and people got involved, and I couldn't stand that. I used to have to monitor which house my 2 daughters went to. They're gonna have a teenage party. Where you going? So-and-so. Wait a minute. I'd get on my radio, I'd call my investigators, see if it's all clear. Sometimes they'd have them under surveillance. They're getting ready to bust the place. I don't want my daughter in there, and I don't want her around drugs. And my daughter many times got mad, crying, Dad, you never let me go any place, and all this and all. And I tried to explain to her. Of course, you can't explain that to a teenager, you know. But one night I told her, right out here at the teenage, and I wouldn't let her go because I knew from being in the police work what was happening. And boy, she cried and was mad at me and everything. And the girl that she was going with, she went out there and they laced her coke with LSD, and she killed herself. I said, see, that could have been you. You're sitting down coke and they think it's cute. You turn, hey, Bubba, and they drop an LSD in there, and the girl killed herself. And then my daughter realized how serious I was. And that bothered me. And then particularly a few of my good friends.
And who put the LSD? What kind of party was this?
Just teenagers, just teenage parties.
Okay, but conchs, locals, or mix?
Well, back then it was mostly conchs. I mean, I don't know if there were some strangers here or whatever have you.
Right.
All I know is that the word was around. There was some drug use and marijuana and all this, and I wasn't gonna let my daughters be there. And that sort of discouraged me. And then when I saw some of my good friends, some of them got caught, some of them didn't. But they made tons of money. They was riding around in Mercedes-Benz and building $1 million houses and all this, and they never made that kind of money. And they was fronting it, and that sort of rubbed me wrong.
What year did you leave the sheriff deputy's office?
Oh, I went through 5 sheriffs. When I first went there, Mr. Spotswood was just leaving the sheriff's department. He had been sheriff for a long time, to be the state senator. And his good friend Henry Haskins filled out his last 2-year term, or 1 or 2 year term. Henry Haskins gave me my job. We went to school together, and just about that time I decided I'd try law enforcement through the coaxing of the polygraph operator, which got to know me. And Henry gave me my job. And then, of course, Reese Thompson won the next election, and then Bobby Brown, which all these guys I went to school with, I knew them, you know. And it was nice. We was like a family. We didn't make any money. I saw in the article in this morning or yesterday morning's Citizen crying about the poor pay for deputies. And it probably is. I don't know. From what they say, it's pretty poor. but nothing like me. I made $1.82 an hour. And I worked, and I got paid for 40 hours, even though I was working plenty of times, 60 and 80 hours a week. We had no retirement, no insurance, no benefits, no nothing.
That's terrible.
And I'd take home a $350-some paycheck every month.
And what year did you leave?
I went in there 62 and I left in 77. Now, right after I left, things got a lot better. They got state retirement, but I didn't benefit from it. I didn't get anything, and but things did get better there. But like I said, I enjoyed it, and the reason why I enjoyed it is because I was working with Conch, and I was like a little bit different from plenty. I like helping people because I was dealing with local people, and I just like. I didn't like making arrests. I only arrested somebody when I had to, a warrant or if they really deserved it. But I'd rather take and have patience and take somebody home than to take them to jail. And that's just the way I was. I enjoyed the job. The sheriffs, all of them treated me well. Franklin Hernandez, which was the captain, and Jerry Peter, they was good friends of mine, and they was my immediate superiors, and I went all through school with them. Frank stood with my wife when she won, was crowned the queen and all this.
Aww.
But it was like a little family there. But it was the sheriff's department was a pretty good organization. They just didn't pay anything. In fact, every deputy there qualified for food stamps. Now the sheriff wouldn't let us apply because it's too embarrassing. But I was telling some policemen up there with my son, when they was complaining they make $28 an hour, they get time and a half, even if they work 5 minutes overtime. They got big retirement. My son will retire with big money in 4 more years at age 52. All his dentist work and all his insurances and everything paid. And I said, you guys sitting here complaining, him and his buddy, I said, let me tell you about being a policeman back in 1960s. when I was telling, of course my son knew this, but when I was telling the other guys, and I said, $1.82 an hour, working double shifts, don't get paid a dime extra. You got your $350 a month, and that was it. And our radios wouldn't even reach. If we went past Sugarloaf, you was lucky to get your call back. Get up there on Big Torch Key or Pine Key or something, and you get in trouble and you need help. There was no backups. Your closest backup was your deputy home sleep. You'd have to, if you was lucky, your radio, you'd get through to the dispatcher, and he'd call somebody in bed, and they'd have to throw the gun on and jump in their patrol car and come up there to help you. But anyway, that was the police part, and it was sort of discouraging when I saw that. But I loved the sheriff's office, and I loved dealing with local people, and I helped quite a few of them. I was lucky enough. I never got hurt. I injured my back and I wound up having to give it up, but. I saved a woman that drove off of the Boca Chica Bridge on New Year's Eve night, the coldest night of that year. I dove over and I had to swim out there. It was about a 7-knot tide, and I got her out of the car and I managed to save her. And the jail caught on fire back in the 60s, and I was pretty instrumental in saving all 62 prisoners in the jail fire. Because I knew I was one of the only ones that knew how to operate the mechanical system to open all the cell doors, because it was all electric. And when the mental patient set the jail on fire in his padded cell, all the electrical circuits was on the other side of his padded cell, and it burned that. And nobody could open the cell doors. And I happened to be one of the few deputies that knew how, and you had to do it blindfolded because the smoke was so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And I had to just grab a breath and go in blindfolded and feel the panel. It was a big, and you had to open the door, and then you had levers and you had buttons, and you had to know you got to push this button and push this lever and push this button and push this lever to open up each one of the 3 cell blocks. And so, you know, I felt good about that.
That's awesome.
But that's what I enjoyed about the police work. But I love Key West, and I write my poems about. I don't know if you saw that poem I wrote.
I love that.
I write songs about it. And of course, the biggest thing is all the people, you know. But I really appreciate what you and your mother's doing, and I hope you capture. I hope you capture as much of the real Key West, not what they think is real, but you know, the real island and the people and all, which was what she did on her documentary, and I like that. Like on this documentary that I just gave you, it's got like old Hambone Felton. I mean, he's a character from Key West. That's a piece of history. And his brother, Benny Felton, in the wheelchair. I mean, them two was down at the old Fisherman Cafe almost every day. You went by there, they was there. Even him in his wheelchair and his brother. And they remember the times. I mean, when Elgin Street was a high tide alley, the water used to come right up to their porches. They used to go on a skiff to get out of their house. And they could go back and tell you. But see, I captured them 24 years ago, and now they're all gone. And most of the people in that film at the Moose Club, most of those are gone. But
yeah, I can't wait to see it.
But this ocean breeze that I'm feeling right now is just wonderful. I love to sit out here and just watch the waves, and of course, you know, many memories, because I lived in the water. It's a wonder I'm not dead from skin cancer, but I'm dark complected. I used to be 3 shades darker than this when I lived here. I'm light now compared to what I used to be, but I lived out there. I could swim all day. We'd get off of that boat, and sometimes I wouldn't touch the boat for 8 hours, unless I speared a big fish to have to take him back there. But I'm talking about with fins and mask and snorkel, and of course sometimes tanks. I even had a 2-man submarine. We used to pull behind the boat, and 2 men could sit in the cockpits, and with our tanks on and our spear guns, and the guy in the boat and my wife would run the cord so that in case something happened, she could feel me jerk on her if something's wrong. And they would tow us along the reef about 3 miles an hour, real slow. And you could do it safely. You didn't have to worry about a shark coming up in back of you.
The shacks, was it Beau Grand, or just tell me about like who built the first one and all that.
Well, I can't recall the exact years. I'm going to say late 60s, real early 70s. Several of the old timers started building. They built 2 or 3 shacks, almost to Beau Grand, and later on, my wife's brother, Fred Loshley, he and a group, we built a shack right off of Man Key. There was many little channels running what we call the lakes and the outside. The lakes was going down, you entered it from Mule Key, and it was shallow water, just enough for a boat, maybe 4 feet deep. But you could go down there even if it was rough, it was calm. And the little channels running out, people started building shacks. And my brother-in-law, Fred Loshley, he built a real nice one there. And we later on added a 2-story to it. And it had a gas stove and gas refrigerator, had decks. We made a top deck. It would sleep about 16 people up top, I think. We could fish right off the dock at night and catch fish. Some good shark fishing sometime coming through the channel. We used to dive crawfish in the afternoons, and plenty of times we'd dive 60, 80, 90 crawfish, and then we'd have a big crawfish cookout there. And whenever friends or family would come to town, that was our treat. We'd take them down there and let them eat crawfish until they were stuffed. And we had wonderful times down there. Mr. Conch, the fellow that run the local bank here, he built one right almost next to my brother-in-law. And the kids used to have the little boats with the little motors, and the kids would play around and everything. And we'd fish off of the dock or go out and dive and spearfish or dive lobster. And we just had wonderful times. And anyone could use the shacks, even though we built them. You couldn't lay claim to it. But almost everyone that used it, they would keep it clean because for the next guy, you know. And in all those years, you would never see cans or trash around that shack. Everybody, we carried our black bags and we took and put all the trash and brought it back in. So we never did that. And
how many shacks were there? Like 10 or?
What's that?
How many shacks do you think there were?
Golly, I can, just off my mind, I've got pictures. Let's see, 3, 4, it might have been about 8, I guess. I could be wrong there. It might have been maybe 7 or 10, but I can remember probably about 6 to 8.
Oh, and tell me about going there on Mondays and.
Well, most people worked then. When we wasn't working, my wife and I would go down on Monday, or we'd go down there on Friday and Saturday with everybody, with a gang, and then everybody would come back home, and her and I would stay for the rest of the week. And we'd have like a honeymoon thing out there, and we just enjoyed the fishing and diving and swimming and running off to the islands and coming back and using that as a base of operations and sleeping at night with a cool breeze and everything. And then come Friday evening, here comes the boats. It looked like a traffic jam coming down through there. And they'd go to the other shacks or they'd come by. And even if they'd go into the other shacks, they'd always kind of loop to the left to visit us and share a beer or cold drinks or something, and then they'd take off. And it was almost like a little conch village out there. And it was some of the most pleasant days and hours that we spent on the waters.
And what about the newspaper being delivered to you?
Well, this fellow, John Menendez, he had a nice boat and all, and he'd come down there. He'd deliver the morning paper to us. He knew that our ice would only last a short time. He'd bring his ice. We'd always talk back and forth on the shipshore radios, like, and he'd ask us what we need, and he'd bring the ice and the newspaper and any supplies we might be running short on. Of course, her and I my wife and I, we would be out there all week, but we carried enough supplies. We didn't. And you could always catch enough fish to eat and stuff like this. But we enjoyed lobster. I mean, crawfish. We didn't call them lobster. And you could get as many as you like, and we'd just have a feast anytime. And one of the funny instances my wife was mentioning was my crazy Hector, the saxophone player. Well, sometimes when we was going down there Friday nights with his wife, he couldn't go because he was playing at the Two Friends bar. Well, we'd be out there enjoying the night, you know, and around midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, it was quiet and peaceful. You could see the lights of Key West about 6, 8, 9 miles away. And we heard the saxophone. And somebody on the dock says, "Holy mackerel, I know Hector plays loud sometimes, but that's ridiculous. We can hear him the whole way from Key West, from the Two Friends." Well, he had taken and paid somebody a few dollars to take him out on a little skiff. And the saxophone get louder and louder. And pretty soon in the moonlight, we could see this little skiff coming across, and Hector standing up on the front of that like one of those old ship things, and playing the saxophone. Great. And of course, this was unique, you know. And he'd come out there and bring his sax, and he'd always serenade everybody. And that's just one of the real fun times we had there.
Any stories about Doris? Because I interviewed Doris Yates about this too. Anything you remember about? I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, no, I knew. I mean, Doris was my neighbor across the canal on Key Haven. I mean, we knew each other well, but we didn't. We wasn't fishing buddies. You know, what I mean, he sort of. I think he was with the electric company or something, and they had a shack a little further down, and that's where I think he sort of hung out with. We always stopped and talked and everything, but he wasn't in sort of our crowd, you know. But he is a good guy. He is a good guy, and. It was some of the most pleasant times until they made us tear them down, and that was the sad part. And
We had the kids. I had to wrap my legs around Teresa.
yeah, Fred Lossley, yes, he of course he's my favorite brother-in-law, and him and his wife Sissy, and he lives here, and that's who we get to stay with. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to stay here. I'd be able to come down maybe for 2 days and a night, and that's all I could afford. But we have his home. He opens it up to us every time, so we have a place to stay right out there on, I think it's 17th Street behind, used to be Bevis Lewis Chevrolet. I don't know what it is now.
And he built the first shack in that area, or?
It wasn't the first one. I'm going to say his was probably about the third shack that was built. The first one was built down by Beau Grand. But his was probably about the third shack there. But if you talk to him, he told us just the other night when we was eating together, that was some of the most wonderful days of his life. And then when they talked about having to tear it down, they even brought down some politicians from the governor's office and took them out there and showed them the good times that we was having and how clean the water was around. And we was hoping that would turn the tide, but you know, politics is going to be politics, and they made Fred burn his shack, and all the rest of them tear them down. And
They're probably jealous of it too. They didn't get to experience that.
the thing of it is, though, anybody could use it, and they come on with these silly excuses about it disrupts the birds. Well, let me tell you something. The birds loved it. When we wasn't there, the shack was a beautiful nesting place for the birds. It didn't have no effect on those birds at all, and anyone tell you any different, they just don't know what they're talking about. There was nothing there that shack bothered, no ecology or anything else. Not near as much as what they're doing around here today. I mean, we didn't disrupt the little crabs and the little minnows and all that stuff and all. We drove 4 posts in the ground, and the shack was out of the water, and there wasn't a speck of trash around any of those shacks. And it was just good, clean, fun. People could take their children out there, and they could have the run of the place, you know. And one time there, when we stayed out there a week or 10 days or whatever, a pretty good storm brewed up. And it got a little scary because her shacks was really, really shaking. She'd have to take and lock her legs around the children to keep them in bed. And we was out there by ourselves, you know. It's a little scary. But I was never really afraid because, see, the front of the shacks was in deep water. It was a channel. But the back of the shacks, you had water knee high. So if anything happened, you just get in the water and the big banks is there. You could walk to an island. So it was very, very safe. And it was just a wonderful time. It was a good drop-off place where if you wanted to go way down to Marquises and fish instead of coming way back to Key West, we could stop by there and spend the night or 2 days or a week or whatever. But her and I enjoyed it, probably the only ones for long periods of time. But a lot of conchs enjoyed that, fishermen and everybody that went by there. It's just a shame that the government come up with silly excuses for that. But they did, and that was the end of an era, just like the end of a lot of things you see happen, you know. Now the people did that by the dozens there in Miami, but they never bothered them because those people are big shots. You know what I mean? They people in the power, and those shacks are still there. So it just shows you, you know, the way life is. But it was wonderful times. Those shacks added a lot. And of course, when they made my brother-in-law destroy the shack, we did the next best thing. He bought a real nice, it was an old one, but a 40-foot houseboat. And we did the same thing with that. We just take it down there and anchor it. And her and I would spend a week out there sometime in the houseboat. But we used the houseboat like we did the shack. The only difference was it was movable. And that was pretty good. I mean, we enjoyed that houseboat. It was called the Why Not. And it was an old boat. But boy, a lot of fun on an old boat, believe me. Had the deck, the sun deck, you know, they play music up there and the kids would dance and you could fish off of it. And in fact, this DVD I gave you, it's got a picture of us catching a 9-foot shark off of the back of that houseboat. And but the shacks was just one part of an interesting era. It wasn't for long. I don't know. It was in the early '70s, I guess. But it wasn't too long. I don't know. I'm just guessing, maybe 5 or 6 years or something like that. It seemed longer at the time, but it probably wasn't.